The photograph depicted 6 people joyfully smiling at the camera and posing in front of a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. 4 of them were adults, my uncle, aunt, mother and father, and the other 2 were a 10-year-old girl and a 1-year-old baby the young girl lovingly cradled in her arms. Ever since your mother got pregnant, Kylie wouldn't stop rambling about how impatient she was for you to be born. And when that finally happened, she then wanted you to grow up quickly so you could both play together. My aunt explained as I stared at the picture. I had no memories of Kylie, so seeing a picture of myself right alongside her as a baby was fascinating and emotional in a way I can't really put into words. It made me wonder what could have been had it not been for the sudden tragedy that would befall upon my cousin and would devastate the whole family shortly after. Just a week after that cheerful Christmas day of 2005, Kylie would mysteriously go missing one dark and cold January night of 2006, never to be seen or heard from again. As for me, I had since grown into an 18-year-old college student. I had come to stay at my aunt's house for a little bit because it was conveniently located near the college I studied at. After having lunch and chatting with my aunt and uncle, they took me upstairs to show me the room I'd be sleeping in. I recognized that locked door at first sight, Kylie's room. It had remained locked ever since Kylie disappeared, and all my attempts to enter it when I was a kid had resulted in me getting scolded by my mother and aunt. Are you sure you can take it? I can sleep on the couch downstairs. You don't have to do this, I asked my aunt and uncle, knowing what that room meant for them and knowing how they promised themselves to permanently keep that room shut ever since the day they lost Kylie. We've given it a lot of thought. Don't worry about us, Jane. Kylie loved you. It's what she would have wanted, they replied as they slowly opened the door to Kylie's room. My aunt and uncle had cleaned it up a bit the day before my arrival, but for the most part, it looked pretty much identical to how it did the day Kylie vanished. The pink flowery wallpaper that decorated the wall, the shelf filled with toys and children's books, the bed and even the bed sheets were also the same. It almost felt as if Kylie herself had just been there earlier that day, as if time had stopped flowing after she went missing. This room is yours now. Make yourself at home and feel free to call us if you need anything, my aunt and uncle proclaimed before leaving me alone in the room. I spent the remainder of that evening reading a book I had to write an essay about for college. After a couple hours, I decided I had read enough for that day and opened a drawer next to the bed in order to store the book, only to find there already was a book inside that drawer, a very special kind of book. It was considerably smaller than my book from college. Its cover was pink with the title being written in big purple letters that spelled, "My Diary." It didn't take a genius to figure out what this book was and who it most likely used to belong to. I did not hesitate to pick it up and began reading the first page. I was tired of reading the book from college, but how could I say no to the diary of my long-lost cousin? December 25th, 2005. Dear Diary, it's Christmas Day. I've received tons of presents this morning. I knew Santa Claus was proud of me. I've gotten the new Animal Crossing game for my DS, a pair of woolly earmuffs, and this diary. I wanted a doll like the one all the other girls in my class have. There's even a boy who has the doll too, but he told me to keep it a secret. Mommy says I have to be thankful for what I've gotten, and I guess she's right, so not having the doll doesn't bother me that much. Also, my aunt and uncle and baby Jane have visited us, and we've all had lunch together. Baby Jane is the cutest. I promised my aunt I would take care of her just like Mommy took care of me when I was a baby. Reading that first entry made me shed a few tears. I couldn't help it. I could picture the innocent smile on her face as she wrote on her brand new diary that Christmas Day, and the way she talked about me as a baby was so heartwarming it almost made me feel enraged about the fact I knew I had spent time with her but was far too young to remember any of it. December 26, 2005. Dear Diary, what a day. Mommy and Daddy have taken me to a snowy mountain. There were other kids with their parents and we've played together in the snow. It was so much fun. We've made a snowman, and I wanted to give him my earmuffs, but Mommy said I needed them for myself so my ears can stay warm and cozy. I saw another girl with earmuffs and hers were much cuter. They were pink and were shaped like hearts. Mine are just round and red. Anyway, the best part of the day was when I found a doll lost in the snow. She looks like an angel. She's not like the doll my friends have, but she's cute, so I've taken her home. And guess what? I've named her Jane, like the baby. That entry made me notice something I had first seen when I entered the room, but I hadn't really paid attention to it until Kylie's diary brought it up. The plush doll that was sitting on Kylie's bed, which was now my bed, I guess. It looked like a traditional angel, with a pair of wings, white robes, and a small halo on its head. I had no doubt about it. This doll had to be the same one mentioned in the diary, which Kylie had named after myself. Kylie wrote that she had found the doll lost on a snowy mountain in late 2005, but it looked to be much older than that. It would have felt right at home in an antique store filled with memorabilia from the Victorian era. Who knows where it had come from and what it had been through before being found by Kylie. I figured that continuing to read the diary would perhaps give me more information about that mysterious doll I shared my name with. December 27, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane cried last night. She was sleeping by my side, and she started crying like a real kid. This morning, I've told Mommy and Daddy, but they believe I'm just playing pretend. But I'm not. I woke up and she wasn't in bed with me. Maybe she didn't want me to pick her up. I tried to cheer her up by bringing her to my friend Sarah's house. We played with our dolls and had a make-believe tea party. Sarah said Jane wasn't as cute as her doll. She said Jane was kinda creepy. I got upset because that made Jane feel sad, so she might cry tonight as well. Thanks a lot, Sarah. That last entry left me utterly baffled. A plethora of conflicting thoughts flooded my mind as I stared at that doll on the bed. No, it simply couldn't be possible. It didn't make rational sense for Kylie's diary entry to be taken literally. Surely it was nothing more than a child with a wild imagination. But still, the sudden tone shift compared to the previous two entries was striking. I had originally planned to sleep with the Jane doll next to me out of respect for Kylie, but after reading her diary, I instead opted to leave it on the shelf with the other toys. It just gave me some bad vibes I didn't quite know how to explain, but I knew there was something about her that felt off, and the fact it was named Jane just like me didn't help either. I woke up in the middle of the night as an odd high-pitched sound broke the silence. I drowsily looked around the bedroom in pitch darkness in hopes of identifying where the sound had come from, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I wiggled in bed for a couple seconds trying to get in a comfortable position to get back to sleep. It was then when I felt something small and soft touching my arm. The Jane doll. There it was, laying next to me. I vaguely remembered having put her on the shelf before going to sleep, but it was late, and I was pretty tired, so my sleepy brain assumed that I had just imagined leaving her on the shelf and had kept her in bed this whole time. A short while afterwards, I was woken up by sudden noises once again. It sounded like a child was crying. I stood up only to see what looked like a small shadowy figure in the darkness, standing right next to the bed. I also noticed the Jane doll was gone. It wasn't on the bed and it wasn't on the shelf either. I rubbed my eyes thinking this was just what they call a sleep paralysis demon, you know, an imaginary shadowy creature our mind sometimes conjures. When you wake up abruptly and your senses are alert but your mind is still half asleep and misinterprets reality. But those kinds of illusions are normally static and lifeless and only last a couple seconds. No, that shadowy child was something else. I was sure I could hear them weep. I tried to turn on the lights, but they had inexplicably stopped working. The shadowy child lingered in the darkness, sobbing right next to the bed with their hands covering their face. I sat on my bed contemplating them in silence. My brain was still too sleepy and confused to move or react in any other way. Kylie, I faintly uttered the first thing that came to my mind as I slowly tried to process what was going on. Upon hearing my words, the child stopped weeping and put down their hands which had been covering her face. The baby, where is the baby? The child yelled in a voice that resembled that of a little girl. As they lunged themselves towards me, I finally snapped out of my drowsy state as my survival instincts kicked in. I struggled as the child aggressively tried to grab my hair, and I tried to hold her arms. the baby," the child kept uttering. I gathered all the strength I could muster and pushed her out of the bed, causing her to tumble to the floor as I screamed in panic. My aunt and uncle came running to my room as I hopped out of bed. "Jane, what's the matter?" they asked worryingly. "The doll disappeared, and then there was a kid, and they attacked me," I shouted in tears as I was trying to make sense of what had just happened. My uncle turned on the lights, and it worked, unlike what had happened when I had tried it earlier. "What doll?" "The one that's over there on the bed. It used to belong to Kylie. You must have had a nightmare. We understand better than anyone it must be emotionally intense for you to sleep in this room, but there's nothing to worry about." My aunt comforted me as I stared in disbelief at the doll, which had somehow reappeared on the bed. The shadowy kid had vanished without a trace. There were only 45 minutes left until 7 a.m., which was the time I usually woke up at, so I decided not to go back to bed and to have breakfast early. My uncle accompanied me to the kitchen with his characteristic limp as my aunt stayed behind. "Calm down, my dear, calm down," I heard my aunt murmur. I initially thought she was talking to me until I noticed her eyes weren't directed towards me, but she instead was looking back at Kylie's room. I brought Kylie's diary with me to college. The last lecture of the day was considered the most boring one by practically the entire class, so plenty of students spent the hour distracting themselves with their computers, playing video games, or checking social media. I opted to spend it reading a few entries of Kylie's diary, desperate to find out more details about my cousin's fate, especially after the terrifying events I had experienced the previous night. December 28, 2005. Dear Diary, I can't believe it. It's happening for real. First of all, I've lost my second milk tooth this morning while I was eating cereal for breakfast. I've put it under my pillow so the tooth fairy can come to pick it up. But I'm also excited for another thing. My aunt and uncle have gone on a trip to another country together and have left baby Jane with us in our house for a few days. I convinced my mommy and daddy to let the baby sleep in my room with me. I'll ask the tooth fairy to bring me something I can give to baby Jane. Also, Jane the doll cried again when mommy and daddy brought baby Jane to my room in her crib. I think she wants me to put her right next to baby Jane, so I'll do that tonight. And the two Janes can sleep together. Isn't that cute? December 29, 2005. Dear Diary, I don't understand what happened last night. Baby Jane wouldn't stop crying. Jane the doll was grabbing the baby's face, and baby Jane started moving her adorable tiny hands and feet because she wanted the doll away from her. I grabbed the doll and told her, "Bad, Jane, bad. Hurting babies is what naughty people do." Mommy and daddy came running to my room to see why baby Jane was crying, and they brought her to their room to sleep with them. Maybe Jane the doll doesn't like baby Jane because they have the same name. I knew I should have named her Annabelle or something like that. My face went pale as I finished reading those two entries. For years, I had believed that Christmas Day of 2005 was the last time Kylie and I had ever spent time together, but apparently I was wrong. I had spent my whole childhood and adolescence asking my family about Kylie, and not even once did they mention that I had spent several days alongside her after Christmas Day right before her disappearance. It was a hard pill to swallow, but the diary confirmed that my family clearly knew more than they were letting out. But to what extent? Thinking about it sent shivers down my spine. But I had to accept it was a factor I needed to take into consideration if I really wanted to get to the bottom of this. "Hey, are you okay? You look concerned," asked Cindy, a classmate of mine who sat right next to me upon seeing my reaction to Kylie's diary. "It's nothing. I'm just reading a thriller novel with lots of suspense," I replied, discreetly putting the diary away so she wouldn't be able to see what I was truly reading. Cindy was really into creepy disappearances and paranormal experiences. One day, she told me a really weird story about a paranormal phenomenon occurring at a daycare, but I didn't really pay attention to her. I contemplated asking her for help in solving the case of my missing cousin and the doll, but I ultimately opted to keep investigating on my own. I didn't want to make this rabbit hole bigger than it already was by bringing in people who had nothing to do with it. I arrived at my uncle's house after college and found myself alone for a while since my aunt An uncle had gone to hang out with several other families they had met at their collective therapy sessions for families who had lost their children. They were especially close with the parents of a little boy named Hugh, as well as the parents of a teenage girl named Molly, both of whom had gone missing a few years earlier than Kylie in some incident I don't know much about. My aunt and uncle had left lunch prepared for me, so I ate on my own and thought about what I would do later that night. Since I didn't want to sleep with that Jane doll again, I figured reading more of Kylie's diary would give me a solution. December 30th, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane the doll is behaving very badly since baby Jane came to our house. I told my mommy and daddy about it, but they still don't believe that a doll is able to do all these things. Baby Jane sleeps in their room now, but Jane the doll is still causing trouble. Baby Jane and I were having a nap after lunch, but I was in my bedroom and she was in mommy and daddy's bedroom while they were in the living room. Jane the doll was in my room at first, but then I fell asleep for a little while and she wasn't there when I woke up. I ran to my mommy and daddy's room and Jane the doll was in baby Jane's crib and her hands were covering baby Jane's mouth so she couldn't cry. I grabbed Jane the doll and tossed her to the floor. Tonight I'll bring baby Jane to my room and leave Jane the doll with my parents while they're asleep. They'll get mad at me, but I don't care. I must protect baby Jane. I was astonished. The experience with the Jane doll I had the previous night made it clear to me it was best to stay away from it, but I never could have imagined it had been after me since I was a literal baby, and Kylie caught on eventually and did her best to keep me safe. I had no doubt that accursed doll was responsible for whatever had happened to her. It was then when I noticed there was only one last entry of the diary left to read. I eagerly turned the page in order to find out what secrets could Kylie's last entry hold. January 2nd, 2006. Dear Diary, the baby. Where is the baby? Did the doll take the baby? Did Jane take Kylie? The baby is not with me. Protect the baby. Kylie must protect the baby. Kylie is here. Jane is here. But where is the baby? Kylie will always protect the baby. Always. If the previous entries had impressed me, this last one simply left me speechless to a point I cannot describe with words. The things Kylie had written up to that point had described outlandish situations, sure, but the events they narrated at least maintained a certain degree of cohesion and structure. In contrast, this last entry didn't really narrate any events at all, and instead seemed like the ramblings of someone who had gone mad and was in the middle of having a mental breakdown. It was hard to believe a little girl who had once been so innocent and cheerful could have written something like this, but its disturbing content wasn't the only thing that felt off about this last entry. The date. It was supposedly written in January 2nd of 2006, but the previous entry was dated December 30th of 2005. What happened between those two dates? It was apparent a couple of pages had been removed, but by who? Just when I was starting to theorize about the mysterious last diary entry and the pair of missing entries, my aunt and uncle arrived home. For that night, I decided to follow Kylie's plan and get the Jane doll away from my room by putting her in the attic. I also locked my bedroom's door for good measure. I was woken up in the middle of the night once again. Only this time, it wasn't because of something coming from inside the bedroom, but from the outside. I could have sworn I had heard the attic's door opening at the other side of the hallway. Multiple taps, footsteps. Someone was coming to my bedroom. It didn't take long before they knocked on the door. Who's there? I uttered, but received no response. They kept knocking again and again, growing more and more impatient until what had started as normal knocking turned into aggressive banging. I lay on my bed horrified as the entity at the other side of the door began to whisper some familiar words. The baby, a little girl's voice repeatedly uttered. I had no doubt it was the same shadowy child from the previous night. More taps. All of a sudden, the sound of footsteps echoed across the hallway once again. Someone else was heading to the bedroom. I felt shivers going down my spine as the sound of rattling keys was followed by the slow and eerie creaking of my bedroom's door. Whoever they were, it was evident that second individual had come to open the door for the shadowy child. For Kylie, I frantically hid under the bed as the door opened and the outline of the two individuals became barely visible in the dark hallway right in front of the bedroom. Kylie stepped inside the bedroom as the other individual who was much taller, began to walk away with a very familiar limp. "You won't take her away," Kylie murmured, as she aimlessly roamed around the bedroom. I had tried to talk to her last time, and that had only resulted in her attacking me, so I opted to keep silent under the bed. After several minutes of roaming the bedroom filled with confusion and anger, Kylie crouched and crawled under the bed. My heart was racing as I thought she had found my hiding spot and was coming for me, but to my surprise, she curled into a ball and began weeping, seemingly unaware of my presence just a few inches away. I held my breath as well as the tears that were flowing from my eyes, trying not to make a sound as I slowly wiggled away from Kylie, who was still quietly sobbing in a corner. Slowly but surely, I began emerging from under the bed. The upper half of my body had made it out, but I was still struggling with my legs and feet. Thump, my face went pale as I felt my right foot hitting one of the bed's legs. Kylie yelled as she reached out with her arms to try and drag me back under the bed. She tried to get a hold of my feet, but by that point I had stopped trying to be stealthy. I stood up and quickly sprinted out of the bedroom as I could see Kylie's blurry silhouette crawling from under the bed. "Jane, what's wrong? Why aren't you in your room?" my aunt and uncle exclaimed in confusion as I ran to their bedroom. "You know what's going on," I replied in a combination of anger and fear. "What are you talking about? Shouldn't you be asleep? You have to get up early to go to college tomorrow," they said, continuing to act clueless. "I'm talking about Kylie. I can hardly believe it myself, but Kylie's still in there, and that creepy doll of hers has something to do with it. Jane, we get that Kylie's disappearance has affected you ever since you were a child. We're the first ones who wish we could see her again. We also sometimes imagine that she's still with us, but we have to face the truth and press on. We can't let our lives be consumed by grief. You're tired. You should really go back to sleep. We can talk about this tomorrow if you need to, okay?" my aunt uttered in a soft, motherly voice as she hugged me. Seeing how trying to talk to them was futile, I ended up doing what they told me and going back to sleep, but not to Kylie's bedroom. I spent the remainder of that night sleeping on the couch downstairs. My aunt, my uncle, and I ate breakfast gathered around the table in the kitchen, with all three of us eating in silence. Even if you had been a stranger randomly stumbling into the kitchen without the slightest idea of who we were or what was going on, you would have still been able to sense the palpable tension between us pretty clearly. As I finished eating my toast, I took a deep breath before finally deciding to break the ice. "We need to talk. We need to talk about Kylie," I uttered. We returned to staring at each other silently for a couple seconds before my aunt responded. "Sure, honey. If only Kylie could see you all grown up," she said as she shed a few tears. "We can talk about what happened if that's what you want, even though I'm not sure what we can tell you that you didn't already know," my uncle added. "Then why didn't you tell me about the fact I was there?" I stoutly asked. Once again, they stayed silent. Judging by their stare, it was clear they were not expecting that question. "I was there the week Kylie vanished. My parents were on a trip and I stayed at your house as a baby alongside Kylie. I know this because I found her old diary in her room. I've read it all except for a few pages that are missing. Why did no one in my family ever tell me about this?" I continued my interrogation, raising my voice to make it clear I was not joking around. "You were just a baby. We thought that learning about it would be too traumatic for you, and since you had no memories of it anyways, we figured it would be best to omit that detail," my uncle answered once they realized I was going to stop at nothing to find out the truth. "But I'm not a baby anymore. I have the right to find out what truly happened, and that fact you call a detail is much more than that. Kylie wrote about the time she spent with me. She wrote about that doll that she named after myself. I don't know how or why, but that thing wants something from me. It has wanted something from me ever since I was a baby, and Kylie knew and tried to protect me." "Hold on, Jane, you're taking this too far. Are you suggesting that a simple doll is responsible for my daughter's disappearance?" my aunt asked. "I'm not suggesting it, I'm sure of it. And Kylie, she might not be the same, but she's not entirely gone. That doll has gotten a hold of her. I've seen her. I've seen firsthand what happens in her room every night," I exclaimed. "Look at the time. You'd better get going or else you'll be late to college," my uncle said as he forcefully put an end to the conversation. "Wait, You can't keep the truth away from me, I protested, but it was no use. My aunt and uncle refused to keep talking and practically dragged me outside of the house. I skipped the last 2 lectures of college and returned to my uncle's home earlier than usual. As I expected, my aunt and uncle hadn't arrived home yet. Great, that gave me some time to continue investigating without being disturbed. It had become evident that my aunt and uncle weren't too fond of me looking into Kylie's disappearance and finding out about things that were never intended for me to know about. That accursed Jane doll was the one behind everything. I had no doubt about it, no matter how much my aunt and uncle tried to deny it. I'm gonna be honest, after what happened on my first night spent sleeping in Kylie's room, I originally thought that the Jane doll was haunted by Kylie, but while that assumption turned to be partially correct, I was now sure it wasn't the whole picture. Yes, it had become apparent that Kylie's spirit had somehow become attached to that doll, but Kylie herself wasn't the one in control. The doll was the one pulling the strings, holding Kylie against her will. Indeed, Kylie's diary confirmed that the doll was already alive before Kylie disappeared, or rather, before the doll took her over. If I wanted all of this to end, I had to destroy that damn doll. I climbed the staircase and confidently marched towards Kylie's bedroom, ready to grab that Jane doll, bring her to the fireplace in the living room and letting her be consumed by the flames. But as I stepped foot inside the room, I realized that the doll was not there, and not only that, but there were no signs of Kylie's diary either. After scouring Kylie's room in search of the doll and the diary without success, I headed across the hallway to the first place that came to my mind, my uncle and aunt's bedroom. There was nothing of importance under the bed, or at their nightstand, or inside their multiple drawers and closets, but I knew they had to be somewhere in that room. Where else could they possibly be? Who else could have been interested in hiding the doll and the diary away from me, especially after I had explicitly told them I had an interest in those artifacts earlier? That morning, I swung open a large wardrobe. At first glance, it seemed to serve no other purpose than to store my aunt's extensive collection of fur coats and scarves. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that there was something else, a small object discreetly tucked at the bottom of the wardrobe, hidden behind the dense row of bulky clothes. I stretched my arms and pulled the mysterious object out of the wardrobe, revealing a dusty wooden box. I opened it without hesitation, smiling of satisfaction as I glanced at its contents: the Jane doll, Kylie's diary, and something else. A pair of pages with something written on them which looked all too familiar. December 31st, 2005. Dear Diary, I've done it. It's the last day of the year, and me and baby Jane will be spending it together. I don't care about what mommy and daddy say. I've locked myself in my room with baby Jane right after having dinner, but we're not going to sleep. She's supposed to be at mommy and daddy's room, but I've swapped her for Jane the doll so I can protect her. Baby Jane makes it hard to focus on writing this because she's sitting on my lap right now being the cutest thing I've ever seen. She just smiled at me. Focus, Kylie, focus. So anyways, Jane the doll is at mommy and daddy's room, but I know she'll try to come for us tonight. That's why I've locked the door. I will not let her harm baby Jane, no matter what. January 1st, 2006. Dear Diary, it's early in the morning. Baby Jane and I are doing our best to hold out. Jane the doll has been trying to get in for hours. All I can hear is banging and more banging. It's so loud it makes poor baby Jane cry, but mommy and daddy are still sleeping in their room. Don't be afraid, baby Jane. If that doll wants to get you, she'll have to go through the door first. And if she manages to do that, she'll have to go through me. Wait, the banging has stopped. I can hear Jane the doll going away. Yes, she's going back to mommy and daddy's room. Wait, I forgot there were more keys in mommy and daddy's room. Before I had enough time to process those 2 diary entries, I was shaken by the sound of footsteps. It sounded like someone was climbing the stairs. I tried to put everything inside the box and to hide it away at the last second, but I was too late. My aunt and uncle walked into the room, catching me off guard. We expected you'd find this eventually. I guess there's no need to keep pretending at this point. It's best for us to tell you everything so we can start getting things done, my uncle said in a serious tone. Yes, forgive us, Jane. "But we have to. It told us it's the only way," my aunt added as she pointed at the doll. What are you talking about? What do you want to do?" I asked as my body started trembling in fear. "You see, when that doll took our daughter that fateful January night over 17 years ago, the one I was truly after was you. But Kylie would stop at nothing to protect you, and she put herself in between you and the doll. And so, the doll seized our beloved child, holding her spirit hostage for years, to the point she lost the ability to think rationally, and is now just angry and confused, eternally seeking to fulfill a purpose she's unaware that she already accomplished. But the doll always made us know that she was willing to give us back our daughter in exchange for the child it actually wanted," my aunt explained in tears as she picked the doll up. "You can't trust that thing. Don't you see it's manipulating you?" I replied, but my aunt and uncle no longer listened to reason. "We could have done this years ago, but we couldn't bring ourselves to do it when you were still a child. But after all those years spent knowing that our poor daughter was suffering every single day without us being able to do anything about it, we realized there was no other choice," my uncle said as he began advancing towards me. His limp gave me time to back away. But there wasn't anything else I could do. My uncle grabbed me by the neck and immobilized me as I helplessly struggled to liberate myself. "Forgive us, Jane. Forgive us," he uttered as I slowly lost consciousness. As I gradually came to my senses, I glanced at the Jane doll, which was sitting on the floor mere inches away from my face as a blurry figure materialized right next to it. Kylie. My parents watched in awe from a few feet away as I broke into tears, never having cried so hard in my entire life. It was then when something snapped in Kylie as she heard my tears. "The baby," Kylie yelled as she grabbed the Jane doll with rage and began ripping it apart. She then walked towards me, gently wiping away my tears with her hands. "Baby Jane," she whispered. Our daughter is back," my aunt and uncle uttered in awe. But Kylie turned back and approached my uncle visibly enraged. My uncle and aunt were so shocked by that reaction they were initially going to hug her, but decided to slowly back away. "What's the matter, dear?" they asked. But Kylie responded by aggressively lunging herself at the one she caught up to first, my uncle, who tripped and fell down the stairs, hitting his head and dying instantly. My aunt, overwhelmed by the current situation, attempted to jump down the balcony to end it all, but I was able to intercept her and retain her in the bedroom until the police arrived. Kylie and I hugged each other in a long embrace that felt so intense and emotional it was almost as if we were trying to make up for all the hugs we missed when I was growing up. "You're not a baby anymore. I like that," Kylie murmured before finally fading away. After my aunt got arrested for having assaulted me and held me hostage, the house was emptied out and sold to another family. Kylie's diary was the only thing I managed to keep for myself. "Hey, how was your day? I've heard about what happened with your aunt and uncle," Cindy asked. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm glad this mess has been resolved once and for all," I replied as I was trying to follow the teacher's lecture. It was then when I saw two of my classmates checking something on a computer. It was a listing for an old doll that was being sold online. It was in very bad shape and looked to have been crudely sewn back together and reassembled with stitches. The listing read, "Jane the doll. Warning. Vintage doll found at a crime scene said to have been haunted. Buy at your own risk."